All right, man. How goes it in the Bosman household?
It's going okay, man. It's been a busy couple weeks, Pat. Not a lot of fitness, not a lot of sleep. Have some family things going on, but they're coming to a head, so it should be good in the next couple of days. But I am excited this weekend. Acquaintance of mine in the neighborhood has requested some assistance milling up some big wood with a chainsaw, and so that'll be fun to help out with that tomorrow morning. So looking
Nice.
forward to that. Yep, this guy he makes abstract furniture, and yeah, so it'd be fun to mess around with some chainsaws. So looking forward there.
Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
I dropped a couple trees in the last couple weeks, and it's been good stuff. Just doing some good work there. And man, it's like
yep,
everything else. I can run a chainsaw, but it's that whole like compared to who.
yeah.
You see somebody, and I'm at the Pacific Northwest where there's
Hardcore
some
loggers. Oh
loggers,
yeah.
yeah, and I'll drop the tree, and the tree will be laying on the ground, and then it'll be time to like buck it up.
hmm
And there's be a couple sections where I'm looking at it, and I'm like, "Sh- should I do that from the top or the bottom? Like, which one's going to pinch the blade? Like, I think it's leaning this way, but it may not be." And half the time I'm right, half the time I'm wrong. When I watch guys that know what they're doing, it's just like
Yep.
effortless. And dude, I
The way they
dropped one
can
of 'em-
handle the tool,
Oh,
it's very impressive when you see
I
somebody who's like clearly got the competence in the body.
and can
But
read
yeah,
the how it lays one. I dropped one in the backyard. It was just a widowmaker that had to come down, so I dropped
yeah.
it and was bucking it up, and it was going just fine. Well, before I did that, I was limbing it up. And man, it fell on a couple other smaller trees, which I was aware of, but everything up here is so thick. It's like a
hmm
tropical rainforest in these forests, and I just couldn't see this one sapling or something that was like maybe, you know, 3 or 4 inches across, right? But it was bent over under this other big tree, and I cut one, and it came
Oof.
up with just the force of 1,000 lions. It
Did
hit
it
me.
get you?
It did get me. It got
Oh
me in this
man.
weird angle. It got me directly in the right shin bone,
Oh
and
man.
it almost put me down for the count. I got a live chainsaw in my hands. It's
Uh,
like the worst imaginable scenario, which just identified me as a rank amateur compared to somebody that knows what they're doing. But luckily, it was all good.
a lot of tension in that wood, Pat. You
Oh,
gotta watch out.
dude, 100%. So, okay, well, before we get to the topic today, which is hopefully a fun one, I'll do the housekeeping as normal. Appreciate everybody watching and listening. You want to help support the show? Go to variednotrandom.com. Check out all the different cycles that we offer. They upload right to the btwb app, and they kind of take all the thinking out of certain activities if you're pursuing something. And what I mean is there's a whole bunch of get your first, looking to get your first strict pull up, kipping pull up, bar muscle up, push up, ring dip, toes to bar. There's great programs that lay out progressions to achieve those goals. And then there's also just some barbell cycles you can do just to get good old strong. There's some engine work, so check all those things out. And then on the other side of the house, if you're a gym owner, any kind of gym or fitness facility, you've got to track the workouts and the data for your clientele so they know what you're doing is working. You need gym management and you need billing. That used to be all separate, and now BTWB has that all in one place, their all in one solution. So if you are a gym owner, go to btwb.com and check that out. All right, here's the question that you sent me. And let's see. You told Brandt told me. Here it is.
Yes.
This is from Avera9636. And this, I believe, you said was posted under episode 214 on the YouTube channel and it crossed your path. So here it is. It's a few paragraphs, but you get the gist of it. He says, Greg, meaning Greg Glassman, defined a spectrum of sickness, health, and fitness with the goal of CrossFit being to promote fitness. I'm 100% all in on the CrossFit methodology and how it promotes health and fitness. I'm going to ask the question up front and then explain further the basis of the question. The question is, do you believe elite CrossFit athletes are healthy? Okay, next paragraph. If obesity is being over fat, while being overweight is carrying around too much weight for your body frame, neither obesity or being overweight are quote unquote healthy states. elite CrossFit athletes have taken the hour-a-day methodology to an extreme. If you observe both male and female elite CrossFit athletes, they are universally overweight. Does that mean elite CrossFit athletes are not fit? No, of course not. Are they healthy? I would argue they are not. Taking the CrossFit methodology to an extreme is like most other extremes, detrimental. As a corollary, are bodybuilders overweight? Yes. Are bodybuilders fit? I would argue not, according to CrossFit's definition of fitness. So why is being overweight not healthy? We know Greg's thesis on chronic illness regarding metabolic conditions associated with poor nutrition, lack of physical activity, etc., etc. Chronic illness extends beyond metabolic considerations. So basically, extra weight on your skeletal system, moving too much mass, etc., etc. And it says there will always be exceptions, but it seems like a majority of the retired elite athletes have premature and chronic issues. So that is the question.
Yeah, quite the question. There's a lot in there, but I think it can be kind of summarized as, 2 points. Is it healthy to pursue something in an extreme manner? I think that's kind of the thrust of the question. And then secondarily, regardless of how there is weight on your frame, is it healthy to have what is considered to be extra weight on your frame? Those are kind of my summaries there. And as far as the first one, I am on the fence, to be perfectly honest. I think it's an easy knee jerk.
First one is which one?
Is it healthy to take something like CrossFit?
Are elite CrossFit athletes
to
healthy?
Extreme. Yeah. And I like the assumption at the end there about like most of them have chronic something. I'm like, well, is that actually true? And is there perhaps a categoric difference between somebody who has put a lot of miles on their body and is experiencing some sort of anatomical issue, meaning, okay, my knees are quote unquote worn out, or the back ain't what it used to be, something like that, but metabolically they're far and away healthier than somebody else. Given that choice, I think it's an obvious one to make personally. So I'm curious as to what these chronic conditions that this person is assuming these athletes are suffering from actually are. So I'm not quite sure that that's as cut and dry as they're making it out to be. But I think generally speaking, I probably agree that, any pursuit that is so singularly focused on and ultimately taken to its extreme, you're going to have to trade off something for that. Whether that's just the hours that you sacrifice when you could have been doing other things with friends and family and other pursuits, or whether that's a physical toll that it takes to take something that, ultimately wasn't really designed for that purpose and really push it to that level. There will be trade-offs. And I think that anybody who thinks that you can have that free ride without the other end of it, they're maybe not as honest with themselves as maybe they need to be. But I don't know that I feel strongly enough and that there's enough evidence that we can say it's unhealthy, if that makes sense. And part of that's like, hey, this hasn't been around that long. I don't know what happens to Rich Froning, for example, in another 2 decades. I mean, the man's in his 30s. It's not like he's an ancient, guy wandering around. And from the outside looking in, he still seems to be pretty darn healthy, even if, like I said, he's got some city miles on him and, he's got a few things like knees ain't what they used to be. I don't know that that means that he's unhealthy categorically. And I don't know that we know the outcome of that until we see some of these CrossFitters that took it to that level and are now in their 50s, 60s, 70s. And I'm not talking about competitors that are there now that choose to be masters athletes, but athletes that have truly pursued this for decades and seen the outcome on the other side. I don't know that we have the evidence yet.
Yeah, fair enough. And before I give my side of it, I will say I've lied to you. Your framing has now changed, and
Yeah, sorry. My setup here is not amazing today. Sorry for that.
I got a couple thoughts on it, and this is probably largely anecdotal, right? I haven't conducted a long-term study on it. So
you haven't?
Yeah, the initial.
Can you get the funding? What's the deal?
It's all about funding. The initial question was related to carrying weight around, right? So I think what you have to be interesting about that is not all weight is created equal, right? You're carrying around extra body fat, are you carrying around muscle mass? Muscle mass is a nice thing to have, but it does weigh something. But you'd probably rather have some muscle mass on yourself than be frail. And it's also that, okay, you're carrying extra weight, so quote unquote you're overweight, but that's also not cut and dry either, right? So I looked up, for the purpose of the show before we clicked on, what's my BMI and where do I
Mm.
fall into that? So at 5'8" and 181 pounds, I'm categorized as overweight. And so my BMI is 27.5. And if you're in anywhere from 25 to 29.9, you are overweight. And once you hit 30, you are obese. So I'm in the middle range. I'm not even I'm in the middle of being overweight. And,
Mm.
I get a little bit heavier, I'm going to be obese. So it's like, okay, I would rather have the muscle mass that I have on me, and I'm lean compared to being, I guess, frail and not in that category. So I don't think all weight is created equal. And so, yes, these people are carrying around more weight and more muscle mass than the average human. And if if you just looked at BMI and no other factor whatsoever, it would categorize them as unhealthy. But I don't think that's a very useful metric for a whole lot of things there.
Mhm.
That unsatisfying answer that we give often on this podcast of like, compared to what, I think that applies here as well. So are they healthy? It's like, well, compared to what? I could say that I don't think what they're exposing their bodies to currently, the level of stress and training and exertion, is, in my opinion, setting most people up for long-term health over the course of decades. But in this particular moment, are they healthy compared to what the average American is? You're darn right they are. I mean, by an astonishing, because the average American is on death's doorstep, for God's sake, with regards to their weight, their
Mm.
condition, their blood pressure, their cardiac health, the whole 9 yards. So yes, compared to the general population, they're doing astonishing. Now, do I think that they are? I spoke to 4 games athletes before we clicked on the show today. Um,
Dang, you
uh,
came to play today,
I
Pat.
did, well, because I had,
Wow.
and I didn't
I'm
lead the
impressed.
jury when
Yeah.
I asked them these questions. I just asked them, like, look, you're probably going to want more information before you answer, but I don't have it. And so my question is just, are games athletes healthy? And one of them, they're all on the individual side of the house. Some current, some former, one in possession of a gold medal, all on individuals. And every one of them, when I asked the question, are games athletes healthy? Their general response was this: oh, geez. Oof, I don't like that question. And they all kind of came to the same deal. They're like, what I'm doing right now, or what I did do, is not a good long-term decision for your health. I wouldn't recommend that people do it. Like, the stress that I am doing or what I did to my body, um, it does come at a cost. I mean, to include stories of, like, one of these individuals said, like, they just lay in bed at night and not be able to sleep because of the pain that their body was in from training, without doing a
Mhm.
detailed scientific study that leads them to believe it's probably not a good course of action for long-term health.
Yeah.
Some of these individuals who are now, one of the ones I spoke to that's no longer in the game, was like, look, there are just things based upon what I did. And, most, not all, had surgeries. This particular one avoided surgery, never actually had a surgery based on training, but had, this was torn. I've just been dealing with this. And like, hey, I still train and my workouts look different these days, but there are things that just I can't do, or I can
Mhm.
do, but they come at a cost. And I was like, well, give me an example. He's like, well, Murph just came around. He's like, and I could do Murph with a vest, but I know that if I do 2 miles of running with a vest, I'm not going to walk properly for 7 days. So I don't do that anymore. I used to love trail running. I can't kind of handle that anymore. My knees can't handle the volume. If I'm going to work up to a heavy deadlift, I need to be really careful as to what that deadlift's paired with, because this affects this. And it's like, some of those things are like, but I think you would have the same deal if you talked to somebody
Sure.
at the pointy end of the spear who played in Major League Baseball.
Mhm.
Like, how are your shoulders? Probably not great, quite frankly, compared to a more recreational athlete. Football, long distance running, gymnast, whatever it happened to be. So I think it is possible to take the sport of fitness, to take what we do at a recreational level, and 10x it to a point that, in an odd way, for at least a fraction of the year that you're trying to peak, optimizes absolutely insane work capacity and performance, but potentially at a cost of other areas of your life that could be short term or long term. It probably depends upon the individual.
Yeah.
I don't think CrossFit gets a free pass in that arena. I think it applies to most upper tier, best of the best, athletic endeavors.
Yeah, I agree. I think the difference and where I think this question is probably stemming from is that as a methodology, CrossFit is purported to accelerate your health or at least to improve it or sustain it, right?
Mm,
I think it's also important to point out that I don't think anybody at that level is training that way with health outcomes in mind. They are
correct.
not
100%.
they are
Yes.
not interested in, oh, I'm pursuing this high level competitive event
Yep.
because I believe it will make me healthier. That's no longer the goal. And so it is, I get it where this conflation kind of happens between, well, it says, work capacity is so intertwined with fitness and health, but yet you take it to this extreme. It seems like there's this kind of dichotomy that enters in there, and maybe there is, but nobody in that realm is really approaching it with like, well, this is what the key to health will be. Now, I think your point is really good about, hey, if you take anybody who's athletic and they take that to a high level, there's a price to pay for that in most cases. And it doesn't mean it's like a really bad thing and that you shouldn't do it because of it.
Mm,
But the reality is like, yeah, if you're going to play baseball, to your point, like, yep, there's going to be some wear and tear, and you can expect that. I will also point out that there's no free ride in any realm in that regard, meaning I could exist in my bubble on my couch
100%. Sure.
indefinitely, and there's bad outcomes associated with that. So, is that a better path? And I think that's often how these types of conversations get framed. There's like this imaginary utopia that gets held up. It's like, well, what about this experience that leads to no bad outcomes? You're like, well, that doesn't exist. So let's get
Hmm.
rid of that as a comparative metric right away, and talk about what are you willing to accept, given that nobody makes it out alive at the end of the day,
Yep.
and nobody makes it to the finish line, bump and bruise free.
And
So I think that's the appropriate framing there.
yeah, and you make different decisions. Like, for example, one of the individuals that I spoke to this morning, who shall remain nameless, I'll tell you as soon as the cameras clicked off.
Sure,
Um, and
listeners love that.
I'll change the yeah, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll change the example a little bit just to protect the innocent of like
Yeah.
decisions that you make if you're actually trying to win versus
Hmm.
decisions that you make if you're just working out for health and you're recreational. Um, the games is coming up before too long. This person's like, I've got a particular joint on my body that is not feeling good right now.
Hmm.
It's unhappy. I have to be like super cautious with it. I could push it too far, and now I'm out. But I also know, based upon how many weeks away the games is, I can't let it fully rest because I'm going to lose something that I
Right.
need to win. So I'm going to keep training on it, and this could be dumb,
You just
but
accept
I'm going to
that this is
roll
the
the
outcome.
dice
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
want to win that bad.
Yeah.
Hopefully you wouldn't do that as a recreational athlete. Like you'd be
Yeah.
like, rest,
Well,
rest.
but this is interesting too, because I also think that when you have anything that becomes competitive, there's a certain culture that emerges from that competitive landscape. And it's a belief structure that I have to do X, Y, and Z in order to be competitive and to remain at this level. Some of that may be true, but there's also a lot of it that goes unexamined. And so I think it does open up an entire other conversation around, okay, high level competitor, is this actually necessary for you to maintain this fitness? Or is that in your head? And that's kind of a product of your ultra competitive mindset that has convinced you that this is optimal when maybe it's not. I think
Hmm.
there is a ton of that goes on regularly, and particularly with high level CrossFit athletes, because the belief is that this volume is just so critical to their success. Some of that might be true, but I don't know that it's as true as some people have made it out to be, if that makes sense.
Uh, and one of the other interesting aspects, which wasn't even someplace that I initially took the question when you brought up to me from that episode 214 or whatever was 3 out of 4 of the people that I spoke to on their own accord brought up mental health.
Hmm.
And they were like, talked about just what regular civilians like us who just work out for funsies, I'd like to PR my hell on time, but if I don't, my sponsors don't care because I don't have any sponsors.
Yeah,
That mental pressure of living under the weight of the training session, the grind, how you're eating, how you're recovering, your entire life revolves around it. What's this competitor doing right there? How does this stack up compared to that? Like, am I doing enough? And like that mental weight on top of the physical weight of the actual training is like this double whammy that just
sure.
grinds on you. And then trying to let that go to just be carefree isn't as easy as maybe I would think it is or something like that. Again, 3 or 4 of them brought that up without me even saying it, that most people aren't aware of like how much that is like can be an unhealthy thing to live on. And they're like, we're not looking for people to feel bad for us. Like if you want, I'm
Yeah.
sure that,
Yeah,
I'm
you
sure that
still make the
Michael
choices that
Jordan
you're making.
walked around
Yeah,
under some mental pressure too. It was like, but
sure.
that was just what came with the territory of like
Yep.
trying to be the best and to live and to excel and to best your competitors. But again, it's just something that most of us don't feel that weight from the outside looking in. So
Yeah.
all that wrapped into healthy versus unhealthy, if you will. But all of them also said
Yeah,
they knew what they were getting into, happy to do it, came with the
sure.
territory, and rock on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the two things that I want to kind of come back to is number one, again, I think it's really important to just take a pragmatic view and say, okay, if you are pursuing high level CrossFit competition and your belief is that this is my path to health, yeah, you might not be barking up the right tree, as I think that there's plenty of other ways to engage with CrossFit as a technology and reap the benefit without having to take it to that extreme. I think that's pretty obvious to most people. Um, I also think that, again, to summarize, if you were to give me the option between somebody who played a high level athletic sport, be it CrossFit, be it wrestling, be it whatever, and you were to say, all right, this person is now past their competitive career and they're later in life, do you want to be that person or do you want to be the person that never did anything and wasn't really physical and kind of, it's not that they were bad to themselves, but they never really took care of themselves on that level? The choice is obvious to me. I'll take
Mm-hmm.
the former athlete, come what may. I think their outcomes, generally speaking, will be much better than the average person that never engaged at all. And so compared to that, it's like, I don't know. I don't know that that's unhealthy, even if there might be some wear and tear. And then the last thing I wanted to circle around on, because I didn't get my thoughts out on it, was just the carrying extra weight. And I think that point is true, that generally speaking, weight on the frame is experienced by the organs the same way. I mean, yes, it's true that muscle mass and fat are obviously very different, but in terms of weighing 250 pounds, be it shredded in an extreme bodybuilder or 250
Sure.
pounds and you're 50 pounds overweight,
Your
your
heart's working
organs are
either
still,
way.
exactly, they're still processing maybe more than they should. That said, I don't think that CrossFitters, by nature of the sport that they're engaging with, most of the time, I don't think they're carrying the extra mass that makes it that extreme so that it becomes a detriment. You know what I mean? Again, I'll come back to Rich Froning as a great example. He's probably a little lighter than he was when he's at his most competitive, but nobody who's running into Rich Froning on the street is like, dude, this guy is just a mass monster. I mean, of course, he
Mm-hmm.
looks fit, he looks healthy, he looks like he works out a whole bunch, but nobody's looking at him and being like, wow, he's on par with a bodybuilder type athlete who's just like monstrous.
Oh yeah.
And I think that that's true for most CrossFit athletes, even at the highest level, particularly once they stop competing and kind of back off. They're not walking around like these crazy things. And that's actually really something I've heard a lot from people that aren't around games athletes regularly. Through my career, I've obviously had a lot of firsthand interaction with athletes at that level. But it's not surprising when you hear people for the first time coming to the games, and then candidly, they're like, wow, I expected people to be a lot bigger. They play big, but a lot of them are
Mm-hmm.
really not that big when you get right down to it. They're not humongous individuals. So
Well,
kind of
especially compared
interesting.
to a different sport like, you know, again, bodybuilding, like you
Yeah,
just
sure.
get
Yeah.
like if I didn't work out, so like I said, 5'8", 181, if I just stopped lifting weights, I'd probably be 15 pounds lighter in 2 years. But if I was a
Hmm.
bodybuilder, I probably couldn't weigh 181. I'd probably have to weigh like 205. Like, they're just
Right.
I'd have to carry around way more. I don't know, can't even imagine that. But like
Yeah.
for the average CrossFitter that's just fit and has some good muscle mass around, like, yeah, I guess I'm a little heavier than somebody who doesn't work out, but I don't think it's at the point where I have
Hmm.
had a physician say, "Look, we have to have a serious conversation because you got one foot in the grave, my friend." So
Yep.
I think there's
Yeah,
a
and it.
happy medium.
Yep, agreed. And then I'll kind of finish with a butchered Glassmanism, but Greg used to talk about all the time. Metrics versus reality. So you could go to the doctor and have this, I call it the Jiffy Lube approach. Oh, all your levels are topped off, Pat. It's looking like, all that we can tell, the diagnostics check out.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't pick up your backpack. You can't engage with the world around you. You
Right.
can't go out and do these things. How good is your quality of life truly? Versus somebody who experiences none of these restrictions. They built up their fitness to the point that they can get out there in the world. Let's say 50, 60 years old, you're out there crushing it with no restrictions on what you can do. But you go to the doctor and they say, oh, something's a little out of whack. But you experience none of that in real life on a day-to-day basis. I don't know. How unhealthy are you at that point? I think there's a pragmatism that has to be spoken about. And I was having this conversation today. This is a little out there and a little
Please,
maybe
yeah, go for it,
speaking out of
man.
my lane, but I think there's a ton of hubris today in what we know about the human body and the different diagnostics that we have access to and what they actually mean in terms of health outcomes. I think there are plenty of people that are very modern and are convinced that we now know enough to predict with certain clarity good or bad outcomes. And it's like, yeah, in some cases that may be true, but there are plenty of cases where you take a look at somebody, you open up the hood, and the levels are either good or bad, and they do not match with that person's experience. You
Mm.
could have somebody where their expected health outcomes are terrible based on the tests that are run, but yet they experience none of that ailment. And the opposite is sometimes true too, where you have somebody, it's like, yeah, by all accounts of what we can see, this should be a very healthy individual, and yet they're plagued by all sorts of things. And so it's just interesting to me that we live in this modern time where there is so much access to information. I think it's easy for us to convince ourselves that the metric is the important thing versus the reality of what's actually being displayed day to day and experienced. So, for what that's worth.
I can't think of a better note to end on. That's exactly what we'll do. I
Sweet.
hope I hope this helped answer that question. Not that there's one exact answer for this, which is why it's just a fun topic to kind of kick around. If people out there have opinions on this topic, of which I'm sure that they do, find this episode on the btwb YouTube channel. Post your thoughts. What do you think? Are they healthy, unhealthy? How are you defining health? Any of that good stuff. If you have a topic, show idea, guest idea for an upcoming or future show, post it as well under the YouTube show. We read all those comments. You can also just leave a public comment on the Very Not Random Instagram account. If you want to be more discreet or anonymous, send a direct message on the Very Not Random Instagram account, and all those things make their way to us. We appreciate them. So for Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood, and we'll see you next time.